Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hi, and welcome to this week's live broadcast of the Revelation Show here with myself, your host, Paul Stevenson, on Revolution Radio. And this is Monday, the 1st of August, 2016. We have a very special guest with us today. He is MICHAEL HEISER. And I'll just give a basic intro of Mike. Mike has a PhD in Hebrew, Bible, and Semitic languages. He also has an MA in ancient history, as basically his major fields in that were ancient Israel and Egyptology. He has another MA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in Hebrew studies. He also attended Dallas Theological Seminary. Mike's undergraduate degree is from the Bob Jones University, but he has also attended Bible College for 3 years. His dissertation was the Divine Council in late canonical and non-canonical Second Temple Jewish literature. Mike's main research interests are Israelite religion, especially Israel's Divine Council, contextualizing biblical theology with Israelite and ancient Near Eastern religion, Jewish binitarianism, biblical languages, ancient Semitic languages, textual criticism, comparative philosophy, and Second Temple period Jewish literature. He is also the in-house editor of Logos Bible Software, which is part of the Faithlight Corporation. He is a lecturer, an author of both fiction, including The Facade and the Portent, and non-fiction writings, including Supernatural and The Unseen Realm. Mike has an active ministry to people whose worldview is molded by occult, paranormal, and esoteric beliefs. He observed that many who have adopted alternative worldviews were formerly traditional theists and Christians who left the faith when their questions on difficult passages and topics went unanswered, or when spiritual leaders failed to address experiences they had had. Mike seeks to fill these gaps as a Christian scholar and has become well known in these circles through writing, speaking, and numerous radio appearances. Hello, Mike. Are you with us?
I am with you, I hope.
Good. I mean, when you read your CV, the obvious couple of questions that come to mind are, when do you get time to do other things like eating and sleeping, Mike?
I thought you were going to say, what can I take to keep me awake? Listen to that.
It's just such an extensive CV. I just don't know how you get the time. And the other thing is, how do you stay humble among us mere mortals?
Oh, I have a firm grasp on my own weaknesses, I guess. And if I don't, my wife reminds me.
Well, that's good. That's good. How you doing anyway, Mike?
Good.
So what's been happening? What's your main focus been on recently? Have you been doing any speaking or events or?
Boy, yeah, it's been a busy year. I've been doing a lot of traveling for Unseen Realm, and this isn't Mike showing up for an hour and saying, "Hey, buy my book." We schedule whole day events where essentially, the audiences are usually half and half, either read the book or are reading it or somewhat familiar with me, and then the other half is like, who is this lunatic? And I cover the high points, the big picture topics of the book, and I've done a dozen of those. So, all over the country, 4 or 5 hours a crack, and then usually it's 2 hours of Q&A, which I like Q&A, so I don't mind that. And other than that, I've been working on another book really that focuses on Enoch. It's the working title is Reversing Hermon, and that's Mount Hermon. For the people who are into Enoch, they already know that.
Mm-hmm.
But the subtitle is The Importance of Enoch's Story of the Sin of the Watchers for New Testament Theology.
Right.
So there's a lot of peer-reviewed stuff. I mean, I only traffic in peer-reviewed stuff on the importance of Enochian material in New Testament thinking, the thinking of New Testament writers. So it's all over the place in terms of the scholarly world, but nobody has collected that in one volume and tried to make it decipherable just for the non-specialists. So that's been the task, and I'm supposed to turn the manuscript in at the end of August, and I'm actually on pace, to do that. So
that's
it's been going well, but it's obviously a lot of work.
Sure. I mean, there's a big buzz on the internet these days about Enoch and other ancient literature. It's quite fascinating, really, just how much interest there is in the whole area. Enoch would be what, Second Temple period Jewish literature?
Yeah, it's smack dab in the middle of what we'd call Second Temple literature, which, for folks not familiar with that term, typically the more popular term is intertestamental Jewish literature. But, in technical terms, anything from roughly 500 BC all the way to, 100 AD, even though, again, more precisely, the Second Temple period ended when the Second Temple, was destroyed in 70 AD, but scholars usually like to round the numbers off.
Yeah, and I mean, the Book of Enoch was, I think Enoch, even though it's not in the canon, it's non-canonical. It was in the Ethiopian canon at one point, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Yeah, and it still is. I mean, the Ethiopian.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the only place you can get the entire Book of Enoch is in Ethiopic, the Ge'ez script. There are large portions of it that have survived in Greek, and then there's some Aramaic fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls and whatnot. So, other than the Ethiopic, which is later than that other material, they're the only ones that today still, and really in antiquity, there were a handful of people who argued that it should be in the canon, but the Abyssinian or Ethiopian church was the only sort of formal group that adopted it and still maintains that status today.
And I mean, it can be. It's a topic which is not without controversy in Christian circles when you even mention the Book of Enoch as something that you would take or glean anything from. I mean, but it doesn't have to necessarily be canonical to find it useful. Yeah,
I think the whole should it be in the canon or not question is kind of irrelevant. I don't think it's canonical, but I really don't even think the question matters. What's evident, again, and this is sort of one of the things I want to illustrate in the book. It's quite evident that if you knew the Enochian material well, you would be reading parts of your New Testament a bit differently, in some cases dramatically differently, because you could tell pretty quickly that New Testament writers had the Enochian material sort of floating around in their heads. And that doesn't mean that we should assign it canonical status. What it means is that New Testament writers read the stuff and found it useful and helpful for articulating what they did write down in what we have as the New Testament.
Yeah, and it very well. I mean, if we were, to suggest it had any weight at all, it basically focuses on, and I suppose fleshes out, pardon the pun, Genesis 6.
The Book of Enoch, roughly chapters 6 through 16, are the parts of. Again, the Book of Enoch is what scholars refer to as First Enoch. There are actually 3 Enoch books. The second one is right on the periphery of Second Temple literature, but the first one is firmly Second Temple. And it's those 10 or 11 chapters that really focus on kind of an amplification of Genesis 6, 1 through 4, the whole sons of God, Nephilim, giants thing. And people say, well, that's just Enoch, and he's making that stuff up. Well, for those who have read Unseen Realm, and I even get into it more in this next book, That is demonstrably not the case, because what Enoch actually does, the Enochian material, is it preserves the original context against which Genesis 6:1 through 4 was written. The Mesopotamian stuff that goes all the way back, to, again, biblical days and even before. And there are vestiges of that original context that show up in the Old Testament, not just Genesis 6:1 through 4, but other passages. But you don't really have it sort of collected and systematically articulated until you get to the Second Temple literature. And Peter and Jude will actually, again, have content about the angels that sin that you can't find in the Old Testament. You can only find in the Enochian material. But that is also true. It's also an accurate recollection of the original Mesopotamian context. So Enoch's not making material up. What happens, and again, this is, scholars would be snoozing at this point because this is like 101 for them. But there's a very specific, very precise Mesopotamian context, a theological context that prompted the inclusion of Genesis 6:1 through 4, this really weird story we have in the Old Testament. And that Mesopotamian material was lost to the early church, but it was not lost to Second Temple Jews. And again, it gets, lots of elements get preserved in Second Temple literature, specifically what scholars today call the Enochian material. And the New Testament writers read that stuff, and it leaks out into the New Testament. I'll give you one example. We've all heard of Gilgamesh, okay?
Yeah, the Gilgamesh epic.
Right. Well, Gilgamesh is part of this story, the story of the Apkallu.
What is the Gilgamesh epic, just for our listeners, just briefly?
Well, the Gilgamesh epic is the story of this, was he a historical king or was he a mythological figure? Gilgamesh, who, seeks to find the survivor of the flood and destroy, this creature, that, in the Gilgamesh epic, is the responsibility for the flood is laid at his feet. Now, the Sumerian king list actually has Gilgamesh as a historical king, but then you get this epic that's very mythological in tone. So, is the main character of this story real, or is he just myth, or is he a combination of history and myth? Who knows? But part of that whole complex, that whole matrix of ideas, Gilgamesh is called Lord of the Apkallu on a cylinder seal, not in the epic itself, but on another text from Mesopotamia. And the Apkallu story is what lurks behind the Genesis 6:1 through 4 story. The quick version here, without citing text, is that the Apkallu in Mesopotamian theology, Mesopotamian religion, were divine beings before the flood. They are always and only described as divine beings, fully divine beings, and they're the ones who are responsible or credited with giving human civilization its knowledge, dispensing, knowledge that the gods had to humans that has good results in terms of civilization, but it also has negative results in terms of the way people were corrupted by it. Well, the Mesopotamian, the higher ups in the pantheon, one day, decide, well, we want to get rid of humanity because they're noisy and icky, and what a nuisance, they're pests, So they want to destroy humanity. Well, the Apkallu are a bit appalled by this, and they don't like the decision. And so they need to come up with a way to preserve their knowledge, the knowledge they gave humanity, and have it survive the flood. And so the way they do that is, again, from the Mesopotamian material, is cohabitation with humans. This is why after the flood, you have some Apkallu mentioned in cuneiform tablets, but now they're not divine. Now they're only half divine. They're quasi-divine. They're hybrids, for lack of a better term. And Gilgamesh is one of them. He's 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. He's also a giant. So in that little snippet that I just gave you, you have all of the elements of Genesis 6:1 through 4. You have divine beings cohabiting with women, producing giant offspring that are hybrids, and even the knowledge element that Enoch, of course, preserves about the knowledge given by these beings to humans is really, the reason why evil proliferates among the human population all over the globe is laid at the feet of the Apkallu, or again, the watchers, the sons of God. Watchers is Enoch's term for them. So all of this from Mesopotamia, Genesis 6:1-4 is a biblical response to the myth that the Apkallu were good guys, and this is great, and they're wonderful, and we should just be so thankful that they gave us human knowledge, and we should be so thankful that they cohabited with women to preserve that knowledge. And oh, aren't they wonderful? Well, in the Mesopotamian story, the greater gods, specifically Marduk, gets angry at the Apkallu and consigns them to the underworld, where they shall never return again. Well, you also get that both in the Old Testament, where you have the disembodied giants, the Rephaim, who are members of hell. I mean, that's where they live. But you also get it in Enochian material. You get the binding and the imprisoning idea in the underworld. And that, of course, is what Peter and Jude describe in their epistles in the New Testament. So you have a really consistent picture if you're familiar with the Apkallu story. But the fullness of the picture is only preserved in the Enochian material, and fragments of it are preserved in the Old and the New Testament. New Testament, the demons of the Gospels, this is where they come from. In Second Temple Jewish literature, demons are the disembodied spirits of the giants, the progeny of the sons of God, the sinful sons of God. So again, it's a whole matrix of ideas, and you can't look at, if you're familiar with the literature, which literate Jews were in the first century, and hey, the New Testament writers are among them, they read stuff, okay? The extent of their literacy wasn't like, making out a bill or a receipt for the fish that I caught by the Sea of Galilee. There you go, yeah. Peter. I mean, they're well read. They know this material. They understand the context for it, and I think importantly, they don't deny the supernatural nature of the context. It's part of their theology. It's part of their worldview, and that gets transmitted not only into 2 Peter 2 and Jude and 1 Peter 3, but other places in the New Testament presuppose this Enochian description. So that's what the book I'm working on now is about, how it leaks into the New Testament in other less obvious places. But it shows it was important. It doesn't matter if it's at all canonical. I love to go and present this topic about Enoch, because you have people in the audience. Oh, we've got to have Enoch in the canon, because look, it's quoted. Yeah, well, so is the Baal cycle, But most people aren't aware of the fact that biblical writers quote lots of stuff, and most of it nobody in that audience would want in the canon. No, but they're just not aware of the other material. So the fact that something's quoted and was even found valuable. Yeah. Is not an argument for canonicity. That just misses the whole concept. But so again, I'm trying to inject a little sanity into the discussion. Yeah, it was important to them, and you ought to read it, because then you'd catch certain things in your New Testament. You'd sort of know what to do with them. Yeah. But to say, oh, now we have to add this, tape it to the back of our New Testament here. Yeah. That's just ridiculous.
It would help us to understand if we put our first century Jewish contextual hats on to try and understand what's
that's all you need to do. Just try to get their world in your head. Read what they read. Again, it'll just help you. It'll help you decipher what they're trying to communicate.
Yeah, and what you said there about the Epic of Gilgamesh and stuff. I mean, you then have the scriptures would be, I guess, for want of a better word, counteracting some of the claims made in this. I mean, this is what I wanted to talk to you about today, because you see these strands, and I mean it's very prevalent today. What you just said about Gilgamesh and ancient knowledge being hidden from man, And I mean, the internet's actually saturated with it today. That, you know, we're being kept down, you know, at some point, whether it was the flood or whether it was by like the Catholic Church or whether it was by whoever, or tyrannical governments, are keeping knowledge, you know, from man, to keep them in their place, basically, so that they don't, you know, they don't become aware and learn their true power and potential from this ancient knowledge which has been hidden for centuries. But now we're it's coming back up again, and you know, it's resurfacing, and man's power, you know, is going to resume. I mean, you know where I'm going with this. I mean, it's so important though, because I think unless people have a grasp of the more ancient views of these things, what happens is you tend to get a very hodgepodge worldview, where it's bits from this and bits from that, and you know, and I remember talking to a couple of guys in Christine's show about this, and you know, they're in and out of, you know, worldviews all over the place. But what I'm trying to say, and I think, you know, and this is what I want to get to, is that we, in the story of the scriptures, from start to finish, you know, there's a cosmic story going on here. There is a story of creation. There's a story of, you know, it going wrong with God's relationship with man, and you know, and then God's dealings with it, and then it going wrong again. I mean, you know, as Christians, we tend to focus on the fall, but in your book, In the Unseen Realm, and in lectures you've done, you also focus, you know, on things like, you know, the Tower of Babel and the flood. Just, if you can, just, you know, parse it out. What is the cosmic picture, starting from the start? And as quick, I know that's a big ask, but if you could, and just because what I'm trying to get to is the way I see this is, and I see this today in today's knowledge, or in today's sort of some of this esoteric resurfacing. We see it in you know, in the theosophical writings, in Alice Bailey's The Externalization of the Hierarchy. And it really is about, you know, man's exaltation against you know, God. In other words, you know, man's rebellion and going it alone for, you know, for godhood and eternal life, the whole "we are gods" thing. You know, I see this is so common today.
Yeah, there's a lot that's there's a lot that's askew, or just, you know, plain wrong when it comes to the way, you know, this utopian fantasy that you've described roughly, the way that's presented. You know, there is, you know, a lot of it is just rehashed Gnosticism. You know, none of it's new, and then, you know, that bleeds into what became known as theosophy, the theosophical worldview. And that tends to get propped up. You talk about an amalgamation here. That some of those points tend to get propped up today, especially on the internet, by something called pan-Babylonianism. And you know, back in the mid 1800s, you know, after the cuneiform languages were deciphered and put into English, and people started to see parallels between Mesopotamian material and Old Testament material. And the Mesopotamian material, you know, was older. Then this modern mythology started to surface that, you know, oh, the content of the Bible like was borrowed or stolen, you know, from this older stuff, and this older stuff, of course, you know, contains certain threads that the Gnostics and the Theosophists, you know, were fond of. And so, you know, you get all this hidden knowledge versus this filtering talked about. You know, nowadays in Mesopotamian scholarship, again, there's a reason why it's called pan-Babylonianism. It's a pejorative. It's a kick in the teeth, really, you know, because in the early days of decipherment, people, again, made certain assumptions that scholars in these fields today know that they're just no longer coherent. It's not a case of literary borrowing in the overwhelming number of instances. It's a case of shared memory or geographical cross-fertilization. It's not like the Israelites were so stupid that they couldn't have an independent thought. And they had a bunch of Jewish scribes sit down one day and say, hey, we want to write something for ourselves. We want to write our own history, but we're so dumb we can't think of anything to write. Let's go to the library, over there in Babylon. Let's make a trip. And then we'll just steal all their stuff. It's just absurd thinking. Yeah. But again, in the 19th century, this is, this is new. It's all new. This is knowledge, again, because of decipherment that nobody had before. And so there are people who are making these logical leaps and methodological leaps to try to explain the congruences. And again, most of what they said today, would draw more than a chuckle in a classroom.
Sure.
In an academic setting, but it lives and breathes on the internet as though it were the gospel.
I know, and this is what frustrates me, because I hear these, and I think that what frustrates me is that it's not, when you watch some of these YouTube videos, it's not like you look and you see, there's 1,200 views. Sometimes there's like over 100,000 views in these things, and there's a lot of this stuff. It's impacting a lot of people, and it's just so incoherent, and it goes unmissed. And I think the sad thing is it reveals that there are a lot of people out there who don't do a lot of thinking. Nothing is questioned, and where very little is questioned. It's just non sequitur after non sequitur after non sequitur, and people just run with it. And as I say, it's just a hodgepodge of stuff. And if it sounds good and you throw in a few ancient language words and throw the Anunakki in there and talk about Gilgamesh, and it doesn't matter if it's got any basis in reality, or if anyone's ever sat down and actually maybe even read part of the Bible for themselves, or maybe even read Enoch to see what it says. People just seem to, if it sounds good, and I don't know. I mean, I find it frustrating. It's one of the reasons I have someone like yourself on, because I remember when I first heard you, I was listening on Coast to Coast AM. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes the thinking or non-thinking needs to be challenged. And I remember you saying, I'm a text guy. Yeah. And there's something about that hit me. And I was thinking, well, yeah, I mean, where's the evidence for this stuff? Where are we getting what is the foundation of our thinking in all of this, so this is why it's important,
Yeah, this is the horn I toot, constantly on my blogs. For listeners, again, for whom that I'm new to, one of the blogs that I have, they're all found on my homepage, drmsh.com, but one of them is called Paleobabble. And I refer to it as the antidote for cyber twaddle, that you get on the internet, about the ancient world. And that's exactly what it is. But the one string banjo here is that I insist that you show me primary sources.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't care what you got off a website. If you say an ancient text says this, that, or the other thing, show me the text. And this is like this is death, to the ancient astronaut, theorist. Sure. I mean, I've had a website online since 2001 called sitchiniswrong.com.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple site. I don't do much with it. I haven't done much with it for years. It just sort of sits there. But one of the amazing, exciting, colossal things I do on this site is I made a screen capture video of me, so it's just my screen, going to the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature, which is online. Anybody can access it. And I show people how to type in the Sumerian, spelling for Anunnaki. You hit the button, you return the search, and you get all of the texts where the term Anuna or Anunnaki occur. And then you hit the little TR button to get an English translation. And I challenge people. And this is just one thing I do on the site. I do a dozen different things. But I say, look, here are the texts. These are primary texts. These are the tablets right here. I challenge you to find any text, a single text that exists, where the Anunnaki are from another planet, or the Anunnaki are from Nibiru. Any text that connects the two. because this is like the core element of Zecharia Sitchin's ancient astronaut mythology. I find a text where Nibiru circulates, because I do the same thing with Nibiru, where it circulates through our solar system every 3,600 years, like you're going to read in the 12th. It just isn't there. So it's not Mike disagreeing about how to translate something. And I don't think for a minute that Sitchin could do the translation work. He's doing, he's quoting, texts like Pritchard's ancient Near Eastern texts in the Old Testament, the stuff that was available to him, or Samuel Noah Kramer, and neither of these guys bought anything that Sitchin's saying. But I say, look, here are the texts. Decide for yourself. Just look at them. Just look at the data. It's not Mike disagreeing with how Sitchin, quote unquote, translates something. What I'm saying is that what he's saying, what Sitchin is articulating here, literally does not exist.
Yeah, it's not even
in the tablets.
Yeah, it's not even
So we can't argue about how to translate something that isn't there.
or even interpret something, yeah.
Right. That isn't the issue. I'm saying it literally doesn't exist. And so how easy would it be if Mike was wrong to make Mike recant or go away? You would produce the text. But I've had this open letter up there, it's over 15 years now, and it's like, look, I'm not holding my breath because I know this stuff doesn't exist. Sure. But here's the problem, just as you pointed out. Unless you found my site and had, frankly, the courage to go look at the primary text, who's going to know? Who's going to challenge Sitchin? Both in terms of people being lazy, they're just not going to do the work, or he's saying something that they like and they don't want to know otherwise.
Quite.
That's the bigger problem.
Yeah, quite.
Because they don't like Judeo-Christianity for whatever reason, and it might be a good reason, it might be a stupid reason, okay? But they don't like Darwinism either. And so the ancient astronaut thing, this divine intervention where we really don't have deities, we have extraterrestrials now, that is more palatable for, again, a number of reasons, and some of them might be more coherent than others, at least more logical, that you can understand why someone would think that, even though it's just dumb, in so many ways. But you can at least understand it. But they like this middle position, and the ancient astronaut thing reinforces that. And again, the other thing they don't know is that you can't find anything in ancient astronaut mythology that didn't exist earlier in theosophical literature or horror literature of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Yeah. Okay, it's all there. You want to talk about literary stealing and borrowing?
Yeah, quite.
Okay, I give you the ancient astronaut theory. Yeah. Because this is where it comes from. All the Hyperboreans, the Atlanteans. Where do you think this stuff comes from? It comes from primarily the 19th, but even a little bit earlier century. This speculative, alternative, historical, alternative religious stuff that literally was made up in its day, but it has roots in this earlier quote-unquote esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
So there's nothing new about the ancient astronaut theory. We just take the same figures and put them in spaceships, or we use technical language to dress it up and make it a good science fiction story.
Sure,
that's what H.P. Lovecraft was doing. And again, this is your faith, really? But people don't think about it that way.
No, exactly. And as I say, this is what I find frustrating about the hodgepodge of worldviews as well, because you get people talking about there's a whole big conspiracy, and they like to think that, that they're on the side of good and everything else, and that if you mention Jesus Christ or you mention the Bible, that somehow you're part of the unenlightened, still in the dark part of the conspiracy. I think the abuses of the Catholic Church have largely, been replaced. Replace anything to good with Christianity. So you need to come out of that and into the light. Whereas if you zoom out, you see from the scriptures that we have two competing sort of agents at work here that that you've outlined in the in your book, the Unseen Realm, right from the start, where we get this
rebellion. John 8:44 talks about it. Ye are of your father the devil, where we have this adversary, both in human form and in the spiritual divine being form, where there's two things at work here. And a lot of this modern day, we are gods, and a lot of the New Age has its roots in the occult and these esoteric writings and the theosophical writings and all this sort of stuff, is man going it alone and bringing, I heard you using the term, bringing Eden to garden, going it alone, attaining godhood, immortality, eternal life, in just about every way that mankind can possibly dream up, apart from where it really is. He who has the Son has life. He who has not the Son has not life.
Yeah, we should talk about, again, a lot of what you're expressing here is this is Gnosticism.
Sure.
And it's a term that a lot of people will use and talk about. It's kind of like the Bible, really. A lot of people talk about the Bible, but have never read the stuff.
That's right.
You know, and with Gnosticism, a lot of people talk about Gnosticism, but have never read anything by a Gnostic.
Or don't even know exactly what it is.
Right. Now, for those, I would recommend this, again, not in a positive way as an endorsement, because I'm not a Gnostic, and I think Gnosticism is misguided fundamentally in a number of respects. But as we talk about it here, you'll see what its appeal is. But a book I recommend is by a Gnostic bishop, Stephan Heller, called Gnosticism: A New Light on the Ancient Tradition of Inner Knowing. He's the guy behind the Gnosis, gnosis.org site.
Yeah, which for the audience, Gnosticism is just gnosis. It comes from the Greek word. Yeah. Gnosis means knowledge.
Right. So we have to ask, well, what exactly are they talking about? So what I'm gonna go through here in a nutshell is not something. This isn't Mike's caricature of Gnosticism. This comes from the Gnostics. All right. So let's give them their due credit. So Gnosticism, as you mentioned, is this teaching based upon gnosis. That's gnosis, or knowledge. Okay, and knowledge of what? Well, it's this knowledge of what a Gnostic would say, knowledge of the true God, the true transcendent God. And you say, well, that sounds kind of nice. If there's a big God out there, it's kind of nice thought to know him. And Gnostics would say, well, yeah, that's part of what we need to do here, But what they're going to do is they're going to internalize it. So the way to really understand this is, you have to understand Gnostic cosmology, sort of what they think about why we're here and how we got here, what our situation is. So the short version is that in Gnosticism, when they talk about the true God, they're not talking about a personal being. They're talking about some sort of force or presence that existed long time ago. And this being, again, the true God, which they'll refer to as the light. Again, if this is starting to sound New Agey already, well, yeah, you get the point. Okay.
Does this God, by the way, fit into? Is it a different God from a dualistic God? Would it be?
Yes.
Okay, right.
Yes. The God of the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, is not this true God. Okay, he's a different figure. We'll get to that in a moment.
Sure.
So you have this true God, and what the true God decided to do, again, and Gnostics have different, explanations of this, was to essentially fragment himself into what are called emanations, or also called aeons. So lots of other divine beings that collectively would form, if you put them all back together in one group, if you smash them all together, then they're going to be the essence of the true God. Now this collective of divine beings, aeons or emanations, the Gnostic term for that is the pleroma, the fullness. Okay. So you say, well, who cares? You got this true God, he fragments himself into a bunch of aeons, big deal. How does that affect us? Well, the story is in Gnostic cosmology is that one of the aeons, her name was Sophia, because the aeons are both male and female, decided she wanted to be like the true God, wanted to be like, him. And so since he was a creator, he created them out of himself. Okay. They're not separate. They are him, but not him. They're just fragments and pieces of him. She thought, well, I have this creative impulse too. I want to create something. And so she doesn't get permission to do that. She just decides, well, I'm going to go create one of my own. I'm going to create like another being, by myself and out of myself. And so she does. Now, when she does that, it has really disastrous results. This being that she creates is not what she expected. It turns out that he's kind of a twisted figure and sinister and evil. And what this being does is, just like his mom, just like Sophia, decides, well, I want to create a world of my own and rule it. And so this being creates the earth. Okay, this being, known as the maker, the demiurge in Gnostic theology, is evil. And this is the God of the Bible. Okay, the one who made the heavens and the earth for humans.
According to the Gnostic thinking.
Right,
yeah.
According to the Gnostic cosmology. So the demiurge, the maker, creates the earth. He creates a bunch of, lackeys, sinister lackeys that are called archons.
Yeah.
And in the New Testament, this term is actually used of some of the powers of darkness by Paul. But he creates the archons and he creates humanity. He creates humans as essentially a slave race. Now that has a distinct overlap with what a lot of ancient astronaut theorists say about the Anunakki. The Anunakki turn out to be the archons. And, the whole ancient astronaut thing is just the Gnostic worldview warmed over.
Yeah,
but anyway,
and little subcategories of it that you see on the internet as well about mankind being a slave race and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sophia's looking at all this happening, and she didn't intend this. She's like horrified at what her creation is doing. And she's like, well, I got to do something about this. Those poor humans down there, these slaves that are just being lorded over by these semi-deity archons, and then my own product, my own offspring, the demiurge. I mean, this is just horrible. So what she does is she takes a little, and this language is going to be familiar, she takes a little spark of her own essence. And of course, her own essence is the same essence as the true God, the transcendent force, the light. She takes a little bit of that and inserts it into humans. And what that does is it is enough to awaken them. It's enough to make them conscious beings who are sentient and self-aware. And her goal is that at some point, one day, through my help and the help of some of my fellow eons who have now seen what I've done, and they want to try to make the situation better, that the humans can be enlightened, through our efforts. They can be enlightened to know, there's gnosis, to know something. What is the something? To know that inside of them is the essence of the true God, that they are not just fleshly slaves, trapped in this world, run by the demiurge and his evil, sinister henchmen, the archons.
Or as I like to put it, Superman finding his cape, finding his cape.
Right. No, but you see this awakening motif. Awakening to what? Well, that really deep down inside, you are divine. You are the true God. You are part of the pleroma. This ought to be your destiny, to have this little spark of divinity in you take hold of you. And someday you can rejoin us. You can rejoin the pleroma and be one with the true God.
Sounds good, Mike, doesn't it?
Oh, it's wonderful. Because again, what the system does is it pits some force, some light force, against the God of the Bible, because the God of the Bible is evil. Now, who's the first person other than Sophia in the biblical story, to try to awaken humans to what's really going on? Well, that's the serpent. This is why in Gnosticism, the serpent is the hero.
Yeah.
He's the good guy.
He's also the good guy in just about every secret society up and the length and breadth of the planet.
Yeah. So the serpent is trying to enlighten humans. Hey, did God really say, he knows you're not going to die? And, he's trying to expose the demiurge for being the evil, awful, entity that he is.
Keeping them captive in the garden.
Right. Keeping them captive, not letting you know who you are, keeping you blind, and so on and so forth. And I'm here to enlighten you, to make, awaken you, so that you can now be saved by this knowledge, ultimately. In Gnosticism, there's no concept of personal sin. I mean, there's no accountability for personal sin. There's no need for salvation from sin. A Gnostic would, of course, acknowledge that there's evil, but there's evil because this is the way that the demiurge has made the earth.
Yeah, there's no
Right.
sin. I wonder if that would be one of the reasons why it's so attractive.
I think it is. What you have to ask yourself, well, what is the system offering? What makes Gnosticism so attractive to so many? And really it goes back to suffering and evil. So Gnosticism fundamentally recognizes some pretty obvious things. Earthly life is filled with suffering, like we all know that. You have organisms, forms of life consume each other. There's pain, there's fear, there's death, there's catastrophe. Something just isn't right about the world. Mm-hmm. Well, we all know that. And so that's an easy bridge for a Gnostic worldview to build and communicate to basically everyone that there's just something wrong here. And, they would say now your Bible, the traditional way that, the Bible is read and understood, places the blame for the way life is on the fall. So it's your fault. It's humanity's fault. Mm-hmm. And the Gnostics objected that. They would say, it's not your fault. It's not our fault. We're trapped here. The real being whose fault it is this God of the Bible, who's actually not the true God. He's the demiurge. And then you get into the whole Gnostic cosmology thing. Well, I have to admit, if I thought that way theologically, well, Gnosticism would be attractive to me.
Yeah.
But what it's presenting is a caricature.
Sure.
And again, if we go back into biblical theology, which is what I'm trying to do in the unseen realm, is I'm saying, look, there are disconnects with the way most Christians have been taught. There really are. Most Christians, if you walked up to the average Christian today and you said, your question was, hey, why is the world the way it is? Why is there so much evil and just awful stuff? And, this whole notion of depravity, that people just, when they get older, they just do bad things. We're inherently selfish.
Bent towards wickedness.
Right. We're bent towards wickedness. And the Bible even says that, but why is that? And the average Christian would look at you and say, well, it's because of the fall. Mm-hmm. Adam and Eve in the garden. And that's it. And you put a period at the end of the sentence. That's it. Well, that is not actually what biblical theology presents to us. Mm-hmm. The fall is one of 3 episodes. Now, the other 2 are, this is where evil, begins back in Eden. But if you asked a Second Temple period Jew the same question, why is the world the way it is? Why, what's going on here? They would say, well, we had the first rebellion against God's, good wishes back in Eden. But then we had Genesis 6:1-4. We had a transgression of the spiritual world and the divine world. And there were spiritual beings who gave us knowledge that it wasn't that God never intended us to know these things, but he intended us to know them according to a certain plan and a timetable. Well, they gave us this knowledge ahead of time, and some of it was corruptive knowledge like warfare and seduction.
And abortion.
Right. Abortion, just violence of any type. They gave us these things. They unveiled them to us, and it corrupted humanity. So that was the second rebellion. And then the third rebellion is what happens at Babel. Okay, what happens at Babel is, again, God punishes, people at the Tower of Babel for not dispersing, after the flood. And, God tries to cleanse the earth and has a remnant that survive. And okay, now we want you and your descendants to disperse and try to make things the way I intended it to be originally. Well, they don't do that. And then God says, fine, I'm going to sever the relationship between me and you, and I'm going to put you under the authority of lesser divine beings, and they're going to be like placeholders. I mean, Paul says in Acts 17 that this was part of the plan to, get the nations eventually back to the true God through the Messiah of Israel.
And this is key. This is key because in the King James version, it said he divided up the nations by the number of according to the number of the sons of Israel. But of course, there's just a basic chronological problem there because there was no Israel at that point.
Yeah, there was no Israel.
Right. Yeah.
So the Dead Sea Scrolls say that when the Most High divided up the nations, this is Deuteronomy 32:8-9.
Yeah.
When the Most High divided up the nations, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God.
Yeah, so basically, this is so important for the bigger picture, zooming out of what the whole scriptures are about. We have this rebellion with the Tower of Babel. You say here, quote in your book, the famous story of the building of the Tower of Babel is about much more than an ill-fated construction project and language confusion. The episode is at the heart of the Old Testament worldview. It was at Babylon where people sought to, quote, make a name for themselves by building a tower that reached to the heavens, the realm of the gods. So then God judged this, scattered them, blah, blah, blah. And you take it from there as to them, how God then deals with his people. Sorry to interrupt, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a firm 100% divorce. He scatters the people, he divides them up, he allots them. That's other Deuteronomy language, Deuteronomy 4:19, Deuteronomy 17:3, Deuteronomy 29:23 through 26. You can trace this whole idea through Deuteronomy, and it culminates here in Deuteronomy 32:8-9, where God divorces humanity and says, fine, if you don't want to listen to me, I'm going to assign you and allot you to other gods, and we'll just forget about you. But then when the very next thing he does in the biblical story is he takes one guy, out of Ur of the Chaldees, Abraham. He calls Abraham and says, it's through you and through your wife Sarah, she's past being able to have children. I'm going to supernaturally recreate a people for myself. And in the covenant he makes with Abraham right after Babel, he says, Genesis 12:3, through you all those other nations of the earth will be blessed, ultimately. So he doesn't forget completely about them.
He's just basically said, if you don't want me,
I'm giving you what you asked for.
Yeah, and then the rest of the whole Testament is basically the nations and these other gods that God put over them, which were supposed to rule them with righteousness. But led them into all sorts of wickedness, and God and his people, and the God and the good spiritual realm against this other. So you've got this, good and evil cosmic picture going on here.
It's a hostile relationship. This is the beginning of what scholars call cosmic geography. What the layperson would call spiritual warfare.
It's a shame. I mean, it's such a, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, it's such a shame, that, you just won't, if this was taught in the churches, to kids when they get to even from like 7 or 8, 9, 10 years of age, they're able to grasp this. It's it's fascinating, and it gives such a general overview, so that you've got some proper context and perspective when you're actually reading the rest of the Old Testament as to actually what's going on. Because I don't think I understood the Old Testament in any real context until I understood this type of stuff.
Well, this is the orienting framework, and it is parsable, it is decipherable, it is understandable because it's told a story. Sure. And again, there's a real wisdom, on God's part, of doing that. But let's go back a little bit, and because I made the comment about, things, God wanting to herd people or shepherd people back to what he originally wanted. And this is again the disconnect with Gnosticism. So let's go back to the very beginning.
Are we going to have time? Are you coming back in the second hour?
Sure, I'll come back in the second hour.
Okay, just let you know because the ads are going to come on in a second. But go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
Okay. Well, let's go back to Genesis. Okay, we have the God of the Bible, Creator. Okay, he says in Genesis 1:26, and this is a sort of a fundamental verse that is often skipped over in church. Let us create humankind in our image. The language is plural, and then it switches back to singular in the very next verse. So God created, male and female, created humankind in his image. Why do we have the plurals? Why do we have the switch to the singulars? What is this thing called the image? What is the point of all this? Now, again, in churches, you're basically going to have a lot of fudging going on here. People will not acknowledge the plurals, or they'll say, "Oh, that's the Trinity." Okay, well,
that's what I was told, because I remember
right.
I remember asking an elder in the church, who was God talking to? What did he mean by us?
Right, and you think about it. Well, if the Trinity, if you have three persons, and I'm a Trinitarian, but just think about the logic of the answer you were told. We have three. Maybe we should wait until we get back to the
we can start there.
hour.
It's a good place because we're right back at the start, so we can take it from there. All right, Mike, I'll see you on the other side.
Okay.
Hi, you're back with me, Paul Stevenson, on this week's Revelation show, and I'm with MICHAEL HEISER, the among other things, an expert in the Hebrew Bible. So, Mike, where were we? We were right back at the start. We were talking about, we were at Genesis 1:26, where in the whole epic of this whole cosmic story, where God says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," and we were talking about who is this us, who is
right.
God. Right.
Yeah, we're really at the beginning of what I would call the epic drama, of the human story. I mean, this is really what God wants, and one of the keys is right here in this verse. Let us create humankind in our image and in our likeness. The verse, that's Genesis 1:26. Then verse 27, when the actual creating happens, it switches back to singular. So God, he created them, male and female, in his image. Okay, so why the switch from plural to singular? Why do you have the plural at all? What is this image idea? What's the whole point? Well, again, in a nutshell, we're taught as Christians, mostly that, this is the Trinity. Well, the problem with that, there are a couple of fundamental problems with it. If this was the only passage, in the Old Testament where you have divine plurality language, if this was the only one, well, you could sort of maybe, get away with the Trinity. But the problem is that it's not the only passage. You have lots of other references to divine plurality. This is, again, my academic specialty. Psalm 82 is one of them. And you don't want the Trinity there because God is angry with the other Elohim, and because they've become corrupt. Well, that's just not Trinitarian theology as anyone would recognize it. So that's one problem. The other problem is, you think about the answer you were given before the break, where you were told, by an elder, this is the Trinity. Well, in any standard Christian theology, Orthodox Trinitarianism, you have three beings that are co-equal and co-eternal. They're three persons in one essence. Well, if that's true, if they're co-eternal, why does God have to announce something to the other two? Shouldn't they already know? Well, of course they would already know. So what's the point? Yeah. What's the point of doing this? It's like, hey, let's do this, and person number two in the Trinity would look at person number one and say, well, I already know that.
That's if even if person number one's doing the talking,
right?
Which one of the three speaking here?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And the third problem, of course, is there's nothing in the passage that limits the plurality to three. There's just nothing in the text like that.
No.
And what you actually have, and again, this isn't Mike's invention, this is, again, standard Hebrew scholarship, Hebrew Bible stuff, is you have God, the singular God, announcing something to a group. In grammar talk, this is the plural of exhortation, where God says, hey, let us do something. Now, I like to illustrate it this way. If I said something to a group, I'm one person the last time I checked, okay, I'm announcing an intention to a group. This is the plural of exhortation. If I walk into a room and say, hey, let's go get pizza. Now, I'm announcing it to a group, but I'm the speaker. And then when it comes to getting the pizza, we go to the place I want. We go in my car. I pay. I pick the toppings, but you all get to eat. That's actually a picture of what you see happening in Genesis 1. You have the God of the Bible making a decision, announcing his decision to other members. Well, who are they? Well, it's the heavenly host. How do we know that, Mike? Are you just making it up and putting it into the passage? No, because in Job 38, 7 and 8, we learned that the sons of God, were there, that again, these other divine beings, the heavenly host, were there before the foundations of the world, before humanity was created. The scriptures tell us who God is talking to. It's not the Trinity. There's no limitation of three, and it wouldn't make sense if it was the Trinity, because they already know what's going on. God announces this to them. Now, it's important, though, to recognize why they're involved, because he says, let us make humankind in our image and our likeness. Now, that language in some way connects God and them and humans. So then you have to ask yourself, well, how does it connect them? What is the connection? And you find out in the passage that the connection is this thing called the image, because that's the thing that is interwoven in all this, our image, okay? Now, as Christians, we're taught I think we're taught very poorly about what the image of God is. 95 times out of 100, 100 resources, 100 people you interview, the image of God is going to be some quality that humans have that presumably animals don't, or whatever. That's the way it's presented. Intelligence, self-awareness, the ability to speak, the ability to pray, rational thought, conscience, all these things. Okay, none of those are the image, because the image in biblical theology is something that makes humankind unique among the terrestrial creation. Now, it's something they share as well with the non-terrestrial creation, again, these other divine beings and God himself. But when we're talking about the terrestrial creation, it has to be unique. And there's no sense that the image idea is given incrementally. Like, humans get it in stages, or it grows to become what it's supposed to be. There's nothing like that. It is or it is not. And it's bound to humanity. So I used to teach ethics class in a Christian college, and this is one of my favorite days when we'd hit abortion. I'd walk into the room and say, hey, how many of you are opposed to abortion? Like every hand goes up. And it's like, well, why? And then you'd get a couple confused looks, and they'd say, well, because human life is sacred. Well, why do you think it's sacred? Well, we're created in the image of God. And I said, well, what is the image? And then I'd get this grocery list, that I just gave you. And I would look at them and say, well, pardon me, but I can't figure out why we're not pro-abortion. And they would look at you like you had two heads. And I'd say, do you realize what you just did? You linked the sanctity of human life to the image, and you defined the image as a quality that this thing inside the woman's womb from the moment of fertilization doesn't have any of them. It doesn't have self-awareness. It doesn't have intelligence. I went right down through the grocery list. It doesn't have any of them. And then you'd have one person who thought they were smart who would say, well, yeah, they're all there potentially. And I would say, thank you. Now you've just made the pro-choice argument, the pro-abortion argument, because now we only are dealing with potential human persons.
Which is why the abortion is justified by those.
Exactly. And so I would corner them in, it didn't take too long to do it. And they would either be angry, or they'd look at you and they'd just be shocked. It's like, look, this is an important idea. This is an important biblical theological idea. There is no sense that this is potential or incremental. Humanity, it turns out, is the image. And, this is based on a point of Hebrew grammar. Again, I'm not going to bore your listeners with a grammar lesson, but I'll illustrate it this way. In Hebrew, in grammar, it's called the bet of predication. Bet is the little preposition in. And believe it or not, we use the preposition in a variety of semantic ways. We don't always mean the same thing when we use the word in, and neither did the Hebrew, the biblical writers. Illustration, if I say, put the dishes in the sink, the word in there denotes location. If I say, I broke the vase in pieces, well, in there, the prepositional phrase denotes result. If I say, I wrote the note in pencil, in is used again in a different way. Here it refers to instrumentality. If I say, I work in education, I work in medicine, altogether different use. What I mean is, I work as a teacher, as a principal, as a doctor, as a nurse, as a physician's assistant, whatever. That is how we need to understand the image of God. It denotes function or capacity or status. By definition, to be human at any stage, regardless of whether you have some ability or not. And folks, newsflash, we all are genetically human, but our abilities are not the same. Okay, newsflash. It doesn't matter because we are the image. Think of it this way. Think of image not as a noun, but as a verb. We are God's imagers. We are God's representatives. Humans alone on this planet have this status that we represent God. We are God as though he were here physically in a body. And this is what God wants. God wants a family. This is the story of Genesis. This is where it begins. God already has a divine family. The sons of God are already there. But God says, I got a great idea. What I want is I want to create a place that's different from our realm, different from our reality. And we're going to create this planet, and we're going to put these people, we're going to call them human, on it. And they're going to be like us. They're going to be sort of my proxy on this place. So they're going to have the status of representing me on that place, just like you guys. Here's where the plurality comes from. Just like you guys represent me in the spiritual world. But we're going to go down there and we're going to live there. We're going to have this place called Eden. And in biblical, theological, ancient Near Eastern thinking, this is called the divine household. and where the leader, the king, lives, his entourage also lives, his inner circle administration lives. And those jobs are typically given to family members. And again, it's all very logical. It's all very ancient Near Eastern and Semitic, in its flavor. We're going to go down there and we're going to live with them, and they're going to live with us. And they're going to administer this place, this wonderful place that I've made for them. And we're all going to be like one big happy family. And they're gonna be tasked with making the whole earth, not just Eden, but not just our house, our headquarters here, but they're supposed to make the whole earth like this place. So Eden expands globally
and make it their own and have dominion.
Right, make it their own. They have dominion. They enjoy it. They maintain it, and they're with us, and we're with them. And this is what Eden is in biblical thinking. It is where heaven and earth intersect. Okay, this is God's original plan, to have a family, a blended family, divine and human. Really, the only distinction is embodiment. At this point, this was the original plan for humans to experience the divine world, and the divine world to experience humanity.
Yeah, and we're in the presence of God without any veil, without any barrier.
Right. No barriers. It's just one big happy family, to use the cliche. Now, part of the tools that God gave to his non-human family members, his non-human imagers, he also gives to his human imagers. He shares his attributes with humans, just like he shared his attributes with his non-human family. So humanity does have intelligence. Okay, they have free will, which is really foundational and fundamental. In other words, theology, Christian theology, has this whole category called the communicable attributes of God. Very familiar turf for anybody in Christian theology or the ministry or anything like this, and hopefully somebody catches it somewhere in a church.
So just to clarify, these attributes would be separate from what the core imager issue is.
Right, they're not the image; they are the means of imaging.
Right.
Okay, they're different. So regardless of how you're able to exercise those attributes, you're still an imager. You're an imager from the moment of fertilization to the moment of death. Someone who gets Alzheimer's doesn't lose the image, okay? That's not what we're talking about. The image is a status. The attributes are a tool to accomplish whatever, again, under the providence of God, you're able to accomplish as an imager. So one of these things that God shares with us is free will. Now, by definition, humanity must have genuine free will, the ability to make a decision, the ability to choose between A and B, or else humanity at that point really can't be an imager, because God is not a robot. Okay, it would change what a human being is and is capable of doing. It would sort of cut off the imaging task. It would make it meaningless if you couldn't actually make decisions.
Yeah, it'll be a creature sort of purely driven by instinct and so forth.
Correct. But these points are important because this is why there's evil in the world. The reason there's evil in the world is not because we have a demiurge, like the Gnostics, claim, who deliberately made the earth wicked and corrupt and fallible and catastrophic just to make life miserable, for humanity. That it's not an imperfect creation where it has all this awfulness in it. Again, this is what the Gnostics, what they want to articulate. That's what their explanation for evil is. But rather, the reason we have evil is because intelligent beings, both on the non-human side and the human side, have the ability to make choices. And they have this ability, but what they lack is, of course, God's nature. They aren't him. And so God knew that eventually, both on the spiritual side, the non-human, imagers, and the human imagers, there's going to come at some point a failure or a rebellion because they're not me. I've shared my attributes with them, but they aren't me.
And the distinction there, if I'm correct, is what they have the capacity to choose evil, whereas God, the Bible says, he cannot sin.
Right. He's going to exercise all of these things more fully, more exhaustively, and more consistently, again, in regard to his own nature and his own will and his own character. But we're not him. And so God isn't surprised when the fall happens. Oop, didn't see that coming. Okay, and neither does he cause it, neither does he nudge it along. Hey, I need you people to screw up so I can go on to the next thing. Okay, but this is the way these things get articulated in churches.
Well, they certainly do in Calvinist churches when
Yeah,
it comes to the predestination issue of him needing it to happen and all that.
And if I believe this kind of thing, well, what the Gnostics say would be attractive. Well, why blame us, for everything? And you say, well, how is what you're saying different, Mike? Because God gives them, these tools, these attributes, he shares them, but of course we don't have his nature. So isn't God just setting them up for a fall, pun intended? Okay.
Yeah,
no.
and this is why, of course, he can righteously judge us because because we've made the choice. Otherwise, we can say, well, why am I being blamed for sin? You made me do it. Right.
God doesn't intend this to happen. He's not behind them, nudging them, sin. Come on, we got to get the show on the road here.
Yeah.
Now he knows it's going to happen. And I like to put it this way. Look, God knew that this would happen. He knew it wouldn't be perfect. He knew there would be failure. He knew there would be rebellion. He knew what would result from that, the tragedy, the breakup of all this wonderful plan. But it really actually shows God's love for humanity because he deemed that worth the risk, or he deemed that outcome permissible because the alternative would not be to have humans with him at all.
Mm. Not dissimilar to a man and his wife starting a family. I mean, when if we have children, we know that there's going to be suffering.
Right. But we would rather have the children than not have them at all. In other words, we know what's going to come with it, but we love the idea of having a family. Well, God is the same. Okay, God is the same. And so God doesn't cause evil. He doesn't need evil so that some bigger plan works. He knows it's coming. And in the book, I get into predestination and foreknowledge, and I direct people to 1 Samuel 23, which I think is the best illustration to show that foreknowledge does not necessitate predestination.
Sure.
For people who are interested, you go to 1 Samuel 23. It's the story of David at a city named Keilah. David, he rescues the city from the Philistines. Again, the short version is he gets rid of the Philistines for them, helps them out. And then Saul, who's the king of Israel, who's David's enemy, has been chasing David most of David's life, his adult life anyway. Saul hears that David is in Keilah, and Keilah has walls. And he thinks, this is a great opportunity to get David, because if he's in that city, he can't get out. If I surround the city, he can't get out. So he hatches a plan, to go down there and surround the city. Well, somehow David gets wind of this, and he's not quite sure what to do. And so he says, okay, bring me the ephod, which was the high priestly garment that you could ask God questions of. Back from Leviticus is where we read about this thing, part of the high priest clothing. And he asked God a question. He says, will Saul come down to, capture me at Keilah? And God says, yes, he will. And then he says, okay, I have a follow-up question. Will the men of Keilah deliver me over into the hands of Saul? And God says, yep. They sure will, even though you just saved their butts. They're going to do this.
Yeah.
And so what does David do? He leaves. And then Saul hears it and never gets to the city. He just turns around and goes home, and David is not captured. So that what you have here is God foreknowing two things that never actually happen.
Sure.
So God's foreknowledge of those two things did not necessitate the predestination of those two things, or else they would have had to happen if they were predestinated. So again, you take that back to the whole question of evil. God knows there's going to be evil. He knows there's going to be failure and rebellion. And he's sympathetic because he loves humanity, but he knows the only alternative to never having failure and evil and sin is to not have humans at all. And God, that is not acceptable to God. And so there is no plan B with God. I mean, you say, why doesn't God get rid of the evil in the world? Well, he could if he just wiped us all out. And of course, you'd have to wipe out the heavenly host too, because as Job says in 2 places, God doesn't trust them either because he knows they're not perfect. All right. So God could just wipe everything out, wipe the slate clean and call it good. But he doesn't do that. He loves his creatures. He loves his creation. God is big enough to deal with what he knows is going to happen. And he loves humanity so much that he deems the bad stuff that's going to come with it worth the effort, worth the relationship. So that is the biblical story. We don't have an evil God. We don't need an evil God to explain evil like the Gnostics say. And again, this is why I said earlier in the first hour, hey, if I thought the way most Christians are taught, I'd like Gnosticism too.
Yeah.
But I don't think the way most Christians are taught because, again, I don't pay attention to tradition. I don't pay attention to what's in a creed or what a pope says or what this guy says or that guy says. I want to know what the text can sustain. As you brought up the thing I say a lot, I'm a text guy. It's the same thing with biblical theology. I want my theology to come from the text. If your theology doesn't come from the text, you can't really call it biblical theology and be coherent. So it really isn't any more complicated than that.
You must have, I'm sure you must have difficulties because I've had difficulties, from having, through being blessed by your teaching, your teaching and the work you've done, by looking at the Bible through the lens of a first century Jew as much as I can, and you avoid a lot of nonsense, literally in that case. But you do also then come up against a lot of long held traditions. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that you have to be so careful because. I've said stuff, and you just get that heresy look. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. The short answer is yeah. I've lost a job over being honest.
Really.
In a Christian college, this makes people angry, but I would say that there's no place like Christian ministry to teach you how to lie, or to prevent you from telling you the truth.
Right.
Or from just being honest and saying, hey, look, can I just tell my students that we might be wrong here? We just don't know. We're not certain. No, you can't do that.
Yeah, and there might even be a better way of looking at it in context.
Yeah, and so yeah, I don't want to call it suffering because that trivializes what real suffering is. But yeah, there's been fallout to it. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I had somebody where I go to church now, who's read enough of my stuff, online or heard interviews or whatever. And she said, Mike, you really believe some frightening things. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? I'm as frightening as the text is.
Well, exactly. And I suppose you see,
right.
I think
if you are afraid of the text, then you will be afraid of me. If you're not afraid of the text, you won't.
Yeah. Cause I as I said to you, I think when we last spoke, when you're a Catholic, you don't learn much about the text anyway. And I once I got to about 19 or 20, I didn't really even go to mass anymore. And I certainly wasn't brought up, in a biblical, environment, both either at home or, in a church setting. So none of this stuff frightened me. When I came to it with as fresh eyes as you probably could. I had some preconceived ideas, but I didn't have a lot of, long held traditions and the comforts associated with them. I came to it and I was like, oh, this is cool.
Well, I don't want your listeners to get the impression that I think, or that, in reality, we're dealing with some sort of cohesive, sinister effort to keep Christians in our churches ignorant. Now, there might be some instances of that. I think when you do get into institutional power structures, like the Catholic Church. I don't know much about the Catholic Church, and I'm sure. I mean, I have Catholic friends that aren't evil and sinister and who love my book. So it's not like everybody's in the same place. Same thing with other denominations, but when you get into these institutional power structures, they do have a vested interest in maintaining their own little subculture, their own Christian subculture. That's why they exist. So to that level, there is a lot of resistance to saying, just kind of stopping and saying, well, is this really something that the biblical text can sustain, or does this idea come from somewhere else? Like, is it a sort of an invented answer, a convenient answer? And when people start asking questions like that, there are people who will get really uncomfortable with that. I think among the laity, the discomfort is far less an interest in power than it is, sort of a wearying thought. Like, well, good grief, if this isn't true, then I have to rethink a whole lot of stuff. I actually have to start studying. I actually have to start reading this stuff. And that's just work. I mean, I have a life. So that's the kind of stuff you hear, and.
Yeah. Don't make me do any of my own thinking. And of course, I think this is a big problem with part of the church, because then you have people who just, if whatever the pastor says on Sunday, and that must be true because he's a smart guy and he must know everything. And and then you have everybody. The whole church is fragmented up, and everybody's calling everybody else a heretic.
Yeah, I mean, there is. You can't deny. I mean, we've all sort of seen situations, where stuff like that happens. So it's not, in principle, it's not a contrivance. The scale is contrived. It's sort of this slippery slope, kind of thinking. But what I try to tell people, again, try to have a firm grasp on the obvious. You can't call your theology biblical unless you can trace it in the text. This is the thing that Scripture assigns inspiration to, that Scripture assigns sacred status to. It is not our thoughts about Scripture that are inspired, it's the text itself. So our task is to try to derive what we believe from the text in such a way that we don't violate the text, that it can sustain whatever point it is that we're trying to articulate. And we're not omniscient. God doesn't expect us to be omniscient. And so there are going to be a number of places where we just say, well, it could be A or B. We don't know. We're going to be tolerant and charitable toward other believers who land on B when we land on A. But at least we'll both know why we're there. And we just sort of let it go. God is fine with that. He doesn't expect omniscience.
Yeah, and the irony is, when someone like yourself comes along where, you would have a unique twist on it, but you're far from being unorthodox or, like totally aberrant or anything. The irony is that in our cultural society, after 2,000 years of Christianity and all the traditions that have piled up, you seem to be someone who is like more aberrant than you actually are, because you're more traditional maybe than what we would have today, because you're going right back to the start where the text was written and how they would understand it back then in the early churches, which is what we're trying to achieve. We want to know what's being communicated.
Yeah, I would say, again, it's not difficult, to. Well, I put it this way. I don't think anything that I'm saying is aberrant or unique to me. The dirty little secret of Unseen Realm is that there is nothing in the book that came from Mike's head alone. Nothing. Zero. Okay, I can't claim originality to any of it. It looks quirky. It looks original. It looks aberrant to people who have thought no further than their creeds or their traditions, and who have not been exposed to serious biblical scholarship. The book, Unseen Realm, as you know, is just, the footnotes are cluttered, okay, with peer-reviewed literature for everything in the book. And that is deliberate. It's one of the reasons why it took 15 years to produce the thing, because I wanted to give the breadcrumb trail so that people could check what I'm saying. And they're not going to be led to Billy Bob's website where you'll read something about the Bible on one page and the next page is, I was abducted by aliens and they told me this. I'm going to direct you back to serious peer-reviewed scholarship. What I've done in the book, what is my task and my contribution, is that I've collected and synthesized the material, and I've tried to make it decipherable to the normal person. You don't have to be a specialist to read the book and to just really follow the arc, this supernatural meta narrative through the pages of the Bible. You can do it. I mean, the book has been reviewed really well on Amazon. I'm pushing 250 reviews now.
That's wonderful.
And my favorites are the ones where someone will say, this was a little scary because it had lots of notes in it, or it was by a scholar, but I gave it a chance and I've discovered I could read it. Like I can actually understand it.
It's digestible to the layperson.
Right. And that was the goal. You
have ostensibly achieved that, I would say.
Well, I mean, I hope I look at where the book's at now as a good start. I mean, this is not something where, I did this book, now I'm going to forget about it. Now I'm on to, another one. I am, but I'm writing, I'm going to keep writing, but I view this as having, over the course of my life, I want to keep talking about the content, directing people to the content, encouraging them, go look up the sources, don't just read this thing and say, Mike says it. I either embrace it because it's Mike or I hate it because it's Mike. It's like, no, go look at the material. If you have been to seminary, if you're someone in the ministry or whatever, and your first thought is, why didn't I hear this in seminary? Well, there's actually really good reasons for that. And we can get to those. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go and do something that you were supposedly trained in seminary to do. And that is go look up the source material.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I want you to do. This isn't, Mike has come up with a bunch of arcane views and wanted a book on Amazon. Okay, no, what Mike felt one day, I can just remember, in graduate school, thinking to myself, I had encountered the thought, the anger actually of, why didn't anyone teach me this?
Yeah.
I ran into that first because I had my own sort of watershed crisis moment, that eventually led to a dissertation. But I thought to myself secondarily, this is really fascinating stuff. It makes so many strange passages make sense. I can see how the ancient person would have read this and known immediately what to do with it.
Yeah.
Where to fit it in, how it worked. So that was a thrill. And then seeing how these things connected to each other. The subtitle of the book is Recovering the Supernatural Worldview of the Bible. And that is a bit of a jab because I'm suggesting that it's been lost. And I believe it's been lost.
I think you're right, yeah.
And my solution is not to say, well, the most supernatural interpretation of any passage is the best one. No, that isn't what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when you strip the supernatural, go ahead.
In brackets, church might even be fun again.
Yeah, it might actually hold your interest, But what I'm arguing is that, look, the best interpretation is the one that doesn't strip out the worldview of the biblical writers, which was predominantly supernatural, okay? You don't strip that out. And then the best interpretation is the one that works in the passage you're in. And it also works in 5 or 6 others. Because all of these things are interconnected. It's a matrix of ideas. So how do we see the interconnectedness? And one of the ways that you see that is to not strip mine it of a supernatural worldview. If you don't do that, if you take it on its own terms, then you'll see how this idea is being used over here and over here and over here, how it echoes through the text. And so that's what I'm trying to get people to do. It's not follow Mike because he has an original thought. No, it's like read the book, and Mike will try to make this decipherable, put it into non-specialist language, and give you the tools to go further. That's the point, because I literally sat there in grad school one day thinking, this is just bad. This is just wrong. That I'm sitting here, and I'm in a PhD program, and I feel like I'm rediscovering my Bible. Yeah. Everybody should experience that. Everyone who cares about the Bible should have this sort of thrill of rediscovery, because I wasn't taught these things. And that sort of became my mission moment, that I can do this. Yeah, I can collect this stuff, and I can make it readable. And so that's what Unseen Realm has become for me.
Yeah, and I'm glad you have done it, because it's such a shame, because the whole thing just becomes this grayness where this is fascinating stuff, and better still, it's true.
The original title for the book was The Myth That Is True.
Right.
And I still love the title. I just think it's the perfect title. But the publisher was like, oh, you can't put the word myth in it. I would just freak people out. Yeah, and I'll concede that, because people are freaked out now. Yeah. When they get a few chapters in. So that would have put them over the edge. So I understand that. That was a good marketing decision, and we'll live with that, even though I just love the title.
Sure, but I'm just trying. Where were we in the actual, before we got sidetracked slightly? It's probably my fault. We were at Babel, weren't we? And then the nations.
Yeah.
And okay.
So we get this whole biblical worldview, and we know we can see what God intended. I want a blended family. I want to be here on earth. I want them with me and me with them, and all this. And of course, we know what happens. We have the initial breakthrough of rebellion. We have a transgression of a divine being in the garden who doesn't like what's going on. Again, for whatever reason, we get hints of what might be the reason, but we don't need to rabbit trail on that. But there's a divine transgression. Someone wants to break up the party and does, and entices humans to sin, to make the wrong choice, and they do. So that, again, but for most Christians, that's where it stops, the events of the garden. Or
Gnostics, from what you said earlier, seems to stop with Adam in the blame game.
Yeah, and then the serpent becomes the hero.
Yeah.
Again, because they're trying to explain evil, and I'm sympathetic to that, because we all deal with that question. But the Gnostic answer is based on a caricature. It's based upon a poorly articulated notion of God and evil from the get-go,
and also not taking responsibility for the choice, which is Adam's initial response. I mean, it's it's the woman you give me, or maybe it's your fault. You two work it out between you. It's got nothing to do with me.
Right. Yeah, there is a lot of evasiveness that goes on with it. But when the Edenic vision is destroyed, God, of course, through redemption, wants to restore it. There is no plan B, as I said a few minutes ago. God wants humanity to be with him.
Sure.
And there's this thing within humanity that wants the relationship restored as well. And so here's again where you get, a bit of an issue, because on the one hand, we can follow God's path to restoring the relationship, or we can act on our own impulse to restore it the way we think it should be restored. And this is where we get these visions, these utopian fantasies.
Preoccupations.
Preoccupations, this God-shaped void in every human heart, as people like to say when they read Romans 1, for instance. That humans want to take it upon themselves to restore this relationship and to become divine. Well, God wanted us to become part of the divine world. He wanted us to be part of the divine world from the beginning. Sure. But God has a means to do that. Yeah. God has set parameters for how that is accomplished.
Which is fascinating.
It is. But the perversion of it is what we see, again, in systems like Gnosticism. And we don't want to just pick on Gnosticism, but other systems that try to, it could just be secular utopian political, fantasy.
Communism.
Some sort of fascist worldview. It's this utopian impulse, where we're supposed to achieve this perfection. And we're supposed to believe in the perfectibility of a person. We get transhumanism today.
Self-actualization, yeah.
Yep. All of these ideas grow out of this impulse. And again, what so many systems say is that God doesn't want you to have this. Well, actually, God does. And God did from the very, very beginning. But we have to recognize who the creator is and who the creature is,
and how he's ordained this to be the case,
right,
and achieved.
Right. We are either going to follow his direction or we're going to rebel. We're going to repeat the same kinds of errors. So we get out of Eden, we have the relationship undermined and destroyed, and God wants to redeem it. And then what happens? We have another transgression of heaven and earth. The sons of God and whatnot. Coming down, and again, you go to the ancient texts, and there's different, motives for why they're doing this. Well, we want to. This is going to sound like Sophia with Gnosticism. One Enochian text has the motive being, we want to raise up our own families, our own essentially peoples and races, and so we're going to go down here and do it ourselves. Another one has it. Well, God messed this whole thing up. Look at what's happened. And we're going to go down there and fix it. And then they get, they go off on their own tangent. Again, creating their own populations, their own peoples and whatnot, regardless of what text you're going to land on, as far as an explanation, what happens, what's being described is a transgression, another divine transgression of heaven and earth. And then when you get to Babel, it's more of a human transgression, a resistance to restoring Eden. Because remember, after the flood, God takes the survivors of the floods and he repeats the Edenic command. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. Again, we got to get back to what I originally started here. I'm not going to strip you of your free will. In other words, I'm not going to make you a non-imager or a non-human now. Okay, I'm going to keep everything intact. There is no plan B. I love you. I want you. You're worth the strife. You're worth the fallout. There is no plan B. Now let's start over, but they don't do it.
And I'm giving you all the direct instruction that you could possibly need, but the penny's not dropping.
Right. They don't do it. And so God he judges them at Babel. He divorces himself from them. He says, okay, you don't want me to be your God. I'll allot you to other gods. Okay. They're going to be your placeholders. And according to Psalm 82, they're supposed to rule justly and righteously according to the good law of God, but they don't. They become abusive. And not only that, they seduce God's own people that he starts right after Babel with Abraham. They seduce the Israelites into worshiping them. Again, there's another meltdown, of the whole system. But these three events, not just Genesis 3, but these three events tell us why the world is the way it is.
It's a tragic tale when you meditate on it, really, isn't it?
It is. But the hope of it is that God never gives up on the original plan.
No, of course.
There is salvation. There is redemption. And this is why when you go through the New Testament adopts this cosmic geographical worldview.
Yeah, and this family that God wanted to create, if I'm correct, this would be the kingdom of God in the New Testament, and the church, God's family who are redeemed in Christ, given the conditions are met that weren't met previously in His Son, and the problems dealt with. One of my favorite passages is 2 Corinthians 5:21. He deals with the problem. For our sake, He made Himself to be sin. Him that knew no sin, so he would become sin, and the problem was dealt with, and through that, bridge to back into relationship again. The gospel, in other words.
Yeah, and God is so determined to stick with the original plan that when after Babel, you have all these various efforts to, what I like to say, kickstart the kingdom of God again.
Sure.
To reestablish the presence of God, the rule of God over his people on earth, to restore Eden. This is the whole point. So you have these various efforts, and God enters into covenants with people. Mm-hmm. And people, of course, are people. They're never going to keep the covenants. And so you have a whole series of covenants, you have a whole series of covenant failures. And the only way to rectify the whole situation, to fulfill the covenants, to redeem humanity in one fell swoop, is for God to become a man, because the covenants are made with men. Mm. Okay, so he has to do this. He does it knowing that I'm going to fulfill the covenants, but to redeem all of this, the incarnate, Christ, God as man, God incarnate in Christ, he's going to have to die.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to be separated, for a short time, and then he'll be raised from the dead, and all of the conditions of the covenants and all these other things will be met, and I will never have to have changed the plan, but it comes at great personal cost to God.
Yes, exactly. And of course, nobody saw this coming because they knew the Messiah was coming. There was talk about it, but no one actually thought to himself, hold on a minute, God's going to become a man?
Right. The mechanism, the death, burial, and resurrection, is never revealed explicitly in the Old Testament. In the book, in Unseen Realm, I talk about the Messianic mosaic, that I take Paul seriously in 1 Corinthians 2, where he says, had the rulers of this world known what was going to happen, what the result would be, they would never have crucified the Lord of glory. And the rulers of this world, again, is language Paul uses for Satan and other powers of darkness and whatnot. So there's this sense that God is deliberately veiling the real linchpin thing that needs to happen for the plan of salvation. That is the death, burial, and resurrection.
And Satan's own murderous temperament working firmly
against him.
Head in the hands moment when it dawns on him.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you read the Gospels. They know who Jesus is. The demons know who he is. You're the Son of the Most High, and they can piece together why he's there. Well, he wouldn't be here unless God must be up to that. Restart the kingdom of God thing again. Here we go again. And it's like, no, this is our turf. We're not going to let this happen. And Satan, even in the temptation, look at what he presents to Jesus. He says, I can give you the kingdoms of the world if you'll just bow down and worship me. So he knows that the plan is the kingdom. And he presents this as, I can deliver this to you, but the condition is, I'm God now. I'm the authority. You bow to me. And, Satan or Jesus just more or less says, get lost. In other words, Jesus knows something he doesn't. Yeah. I'm going to get all of that by our own means. We're not going to tell you how it's going to be accomplished. But, through the Gospels, Jesus, pokes Satan and the powers of darkness in the eye. Different places he goes and what he says are important, again, viewed against the backdrop of cosmic geography.
Or orchestrating the whole thing and knowing that, yeah.
Orchestrating, it's an orchestrated plan to enrage the powers of darkness into doing what needs to be done to kill him. Yeah. And that's what they decide to do. And that's why Paul says, look, if they had known that by doing this, it inexorably will result in their own defeat, both in near and far terms.
Game over.
They never would have done it. Yeah. They're not idiots.
It's like those computer games, game over.
Yeah, they were duped. Yeah. But you never hear it. You never hear the story, presented like this.
No, you don't.
You again, I could just go on and on and on, about, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we were taught X in church? I have lots of those blanks, but again, I'm not under any delusion that that's going to happen. The best thing I can do is to try to say, look, if you're sitting there in church and you just sort of intuitively know or sense that there's got to be more to this Bible stuff than, be nice to your wife, be nice to your kids. Here are some Sunday school stories, now this time with adult illustrations. Yeah. Or you need to let Jesus be your cosmic life coach. Okay, if you just sense that there's got to be more to it than that, you're right. You are correct. You have put your finger on something. There is a whole lot more to it. And the best I can do is try to present, a place to start. I view Unseen Realm as getting the whole panorama on the table, the whole big picture out there, all the important data points on the table. And now here's the lay of the land. Go to town. I mean, read it, discover it for yourself. Take the responsibility upon yourself. If you're not being fed where you're at, you can do this. You really can do this. Don't despair. There's good content out there. You can learn and you can go on from this book into You can rediscover your Bible. You can read it again for the first time. Because I had all those experiences. That's what happened to me. So the book is trying to reproduce that. And if you get a real good grasp on what biblical theology is really saying, you can look at what the world is offering, these alternatives like Gnosticism, like Theosophy, like transhumanism, like some sort of utopian political fascism, all these competing worldviews,
theologies and worldviews that you can parse out with relevance today in light of ancient, the ancient cosmic story of the whole thing. It's not like.
And I will challenge people. Every one of the competing worldviews, they all do take shots at the Judeo-Christian worldview, and it's an easy target because the way the biblical worldview has been taught in churches is very simplistic. It doesn't answer fundamental questions, and in some cases, it's just misguided. It obscures truth rather than reveals it, and it becomes an easy target for these other worldviews. So if you know the biblical worldview really in at least getting toward its fullness and its richness, you can evaluate how these other worldviews are based on a caricature.
Yeah.
Their premises are false.
And Peter says, be ready to have a defense. And unfortunately, whether it's online or in your church or whatever else, I mean, I don't know how many people I would know that if they were remotely challenged on so many aspects which we would call basic apologetics, they would crumble. So in fact, it's one of the reasons I became a Christian, because I saw a guy crumbling in front of me in a YouTube conversation where he had no way of backing up that Jesus even existed. Mm-hmm. And this type of thing, this is what I'm saying, this is why it's so relevant, because these worldviews all do fit, and we can see this in our far left, deliberate through, erosion of morality and God's order of things being under attack with the homosexuality movement and the gender blurring movement and the divorce. It's an attack in the family, and all this stuff has relevance. It's the same old story, the same old battle, as far as I see it.
It is. The church needs, believers just need to be more, they need to be both more tough-minded, in other words, more intellectually vigorous. And they also need to not address evil and address the lost from a fear-based approach. When you're fear-based, you do lash out. You do become harsh. And again, this is why there are many people out there in the world who don't want Christianity. They don't want the gospel because they've been harmed in some way, or dismissed in some way, by a Christian. Okay, you don't have to operate from a fear-based perspective. Get away from me because I don't want to be you. I want this thing that I have. You've got to be able to think better than that and more coherently than that, and really go to someone's heart rather than some behavior they have.
Yeah, 2 Timothy 2:24, Paul says, we must be gentle and patient, and so that they may escape the snare, come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil. And
it's hard to do that if your cage is always being rattled. It's hard to be gentle and thoughtful.
Yeah, and also, I think, I alluded to it earlier. People, especially in Western culture, they know that if this God exists, he's a God of accountability and judgment. And I think it's convenient that, depending on what you're doing in your life, that it might be convenient just to convince yourself that this God doesn't exist, and lest you should have to repent.
Yeah, there is that.
Harsh, but there is that element.
Well, people are quite inconsistent here, because if they're parents, or even if even within their friendships, or even if they're not parents, when people do wrong against them, they do want accountability. They do want someone to say, "I'm sorry, I did wrong,"
right,
and restore the relationship. But somehow, when God does that, then it's bad.
Yeah. Listen, we're coming up to the end of the show, Mike. It's been wonderful to have you on. Just quickly give your website.
My website is drmsh.com.
And where can people get your book, The Unseen Realm?
They can get it on Amazon directly. It's right up there. You can just search for it in the Amazon field. You'll find it.
All right. Thanks again for your time, Mike, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
All right. God bless. I am Paul Stevenson. I will be back with you again next week. I'm on Facebook at Paul Edward Stevenson. That's Paul Edward Stevenson. And God bless you all. Until next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolution